Welcome to DYOPATH Connections. I'm Bill Borbas, and today I'm joined by Tracy Garcia, DYOPATH Director of Client Experience, and Dr. Jean Sophie, former Superintendent of Lake Bluff School District. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much
for joining. I am really excited today. We're going to be talking about building community trust for capital outlay projects. And I think this is going to be very valuable for any parent who's in a school district who wants to understand the process. If you're a part of a school district administration, you'll be able to maybe gain some tips on how to get things through. Or if you're in any type of organization trying to sell an idea, I think this is going to prove to be very helpful. So before we get started, Jean, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. I am a 40-year educator. I started teaching in the 1980s, became an administrator in 1999, and was the traditional assistant principal, assistant superintendent, and then finally a superintendent. My history with building and grounds and renovations really started in Palatine, where for a year I oversaw construction projects there, and they had 20 schools. So I learned a lot at that time. When I became a superintendent in Westchester, we did some construction. I learned more. And then finally, I ended up in Lake Bluff, where I was superintendent for 8 years. And I'm really going to be focusing on my story in Lake Bluff today for the most part. It was an 8-year kind of process to get one of our buildings renovated. I did retire in June 30th, and I'm going to put that in air quotes. And I am now currently working very part-time in North Shore 112, which is in Highland Park. And there I am managing construction and renovation of 2 of their middle schools. So that's my background, and I'm really, really happy to be here today. I learned a lot of lessons that I like to share with people because every story is different.
And we are very excited to hear your story for sure. Can you give us some background on what might be considered a large capital project?
Well, like many things in the superintendency, it all depends. So, and I'm going to give you an example of that. In Palatine with 20 schools, a $10 million project on a $185 to $190 million budget a year is really not much. It's still a big deal because it's taxpayer dollars, but it really, in the scope of life, it's a little bit smaller than, say, in Lake Bluff, where we had a much smaller budget, about 16 to 17 million. Our project was 10.6 million. That was a big deal. And then in North Shore, just to give you some perspective, I am managing the renovation of 2 of their middle schools. And that is about a $75 million project to get those 2 schools renovated. So getting back to your answer, it really all depends, because a large scope in one district might not be a large scope in another.
So what is the process? So when you mention a $10 million project on a $17 million budget, that's what, about 2/3 of the budget?
Yeah.
It sounds like there's probably a lot involved in getting that money.
Well, I'm interested too on, you mentioned, I didn't mean to cut you off, but you mentioned that it was an 8-year project, one at Lake Bluff. Like, you almost need a crystal ball along with you and your project plan. Where do you, like Bill said, where do you begin?
Well, you begin at the beginning. I started work in Lake Bluff in July of 2012. And when I toured the middle school, well, let's start. When I toured the elementary school, it was a brand new building. It had just opened a couple years before. It was LEED certified, a beautiful, beautiful building. Then across town at our one middle school, where all of our elementary districts fed into, the building really needed major renovation. It felt like a great building because we had an awesome staff and it just was a really warm place to be, but there was a lot of work that needed to be done. And as I started in that district, I realized that the community really didn't trust our school district. Part of that was from a lack of transparency, which is critical when you're in a school district at this point. Part of it was that our savings was almost twice what our annual budget was. And as you can imagine, we're all taxpayers. If the school district is being our bank and holding on to that, the taxpayers weren't really happy. They were saying, give us back our money, and when you need money, ask for it. So we really spent 2 years analyzing the budget, bringing down our savings account, which is called the fund balance in schools, really earning the trust of the community, doing a lot of question and answers on our website so people knew. It was really an intense process of earning trust. Then at the end of that 2-year period, we had a board change, which was important. All of my boards there were great, but the board change, this was a board that kind of saw all of the work done on the actual construction. And I got the idea from another superintendent. It's really important that as educators, we network and find out how people do things. That's why this podcast is so important, because people get different ideas. And someone mentioned to me to hire a private consultant, which we did, that only does facility studies. Because it can always be interpreted, if I hired an architect to come in and do a facility study, people will always think, well, sure, they're going to tell you this project needs to be done because they're going to do the project and they get some of the money for that. So I really hired a third party to come in and study our middle school. Again, our elementary school was great, so we didn't need to worry about our elementary school. And they did a study that we went through, and we actually compared it to our health life safety study, which is done in school districts on a routine basis every 3 to 5 years. And from that study and the comparison, we knew what projects we had to do to bring things up to code, to meet the needs of the community, which I'm going to get to that in a minute, and to really address the issues that came out in both of those studies. So in order to have a clean slate with these 2 different studies, we hired a new architect. So that's a process in and of itself. After we hired our architect, we hired a construction management company, and so that they could manage, because I'm not a construction manager, although I think after you manage these for a certain amount of time, you at least get a feel for that. And then we got started on the really hard work of design on what we needed to do. And we knew, the board directed me that we could have no less classrooms. So we had to have exactly the number of classrooms or more, but they wanted a really warm feeling in the building that kind of started with our current library. And they wanted open walls and accessibility, and we needed a new fine arts wing. The fine arts wing was kind of makeshift, to say the least. And we also needed, as they worked through the design, they realized we would have to use some of the existing classrooms. And so we needed to make up those classrooms. So we wound up having a design of 2 specific wings, one of them being extra classrooms, one of them being a fine arts wing. And then we had to address issues like our special ed students, their classrooms needed to be in the flow of the building so that they didn't feel pulled out or, specialized or attention paid to them. So we needed to construct a really nice area for them that just kind of fit in the flow of the building. We really upped our idea of what current classrooms look like. Our classrooms were very traditional, desks in rows, kind of what I was used to way back in the olden days going to school. And with that just came all these great ideas. We wound up constructing a presentation stair that went from the library downstairs to the basement. And everybody kept saying, why would you do that and have a cafeteria in your basement? And when we looked at the renderings from the architect, it was obvious why we did that. It really, when you walk to the middle of the building, you have this huge media center that's open. You have our STEM lab, because we didn't have that before. You have a presentation stair that the kids could actually eat on or sit on. And then you have the cafeteria at the bottom of that, and then classrooms on the bottom. One of the other items, and you'd really try to address all your issues. One of the items that I felt very strongly about, and the board also felt strongly about, is that our district office, and we're a small district, so there weren't that many of us, was actually in an industrial park away from our school district. And there was a train track in between. So in the case of an emergency, and there were a couple where I would hop in my car to go to a school, sometimes that took me 20 to 25 minutes to get there because of the train. We wanted our district offices moved into the middle school if possible. So building onto this existing building, we were also able to move our district offices down in the basement. The board felt very strongly that they didn't want kids in the basement. They wanted to really take away any flooding issues that the basement had from its existing, I mean, it had been there since in the early 1950s. And so we were able to do all these things. Now, I know that you guys are going to talk to me a little bit about stakeholders, so I'm going to get into that a little bit too. So we earned the trust of the community. We did these facility studies. We hired an architect. We hired the construction manager. We worked on this design process. And who was on that committee? And I'm going to share with you, it was an interesting, it has to be rather small or you don't get things done. So we had 2 or 3 teachers. Our special education teachers needed to be represented because we rebuilt their areas. Our music and fine arts needed to be represented because they had a new wing. We had 2 board members. We had myself and our business person because we have finances to worry about. 2 very active parents in the community. And then 2 community members that had grave concerns about the renovation and had background in architecture, and that helped us as well. And we met every other week and literally went through the design of the building. We'd go back to our particular stakeholder group. The 2 board representatives would go to the Board of Education and talk about it there. And that's really how our building was designed. And then we had to figure out how we were going to pay for it. I'm going to go back to earning the trust in the community. We made a decision that we were going to, out of the 10.6, we would pay about half from our existing fund balance. So we really brought that down. And the other half we would pay for through bonds. And our board was extremely fiscally transparent, which I appreciated because the community knew exactly what was going on at all times. And that brings us up to groundbreaking on February 29th of, that would have been 2016. So I think that was it, or 15, somewhere in there. So that brings up where we are, and I'm going to turn it over to you for more questions. I kind of walked through the whole process up to the construction piece.
I'm interested. So go ahead, Tracy.
I just, so Bill and I had a chance to actually tour the renovation after the fact. And that staircase, one is, it's so beautiful. I think as a parent in advance of that, I would have had 1,000 questions and concerns. But then seeing it, what I really felt, and I'm interested to hear what your feedback was, not only from parents and community, but also the students. It felt very grown up, right? So for middle schoolers to feel like they're kind of on a college campus, sitting on the stairs. What was some of the reactions from the students?
One of the best days in my career, honestly, was the Wednesday after Labor Day is when we opened the building. And I was standing in the entryway with the architects, and the kids were so excited about coming in that I actually had lots of tears in my eyes. It was extremely emotional. The kids were so excited. It does feel very grown up. And I really didn't believe people that told me this before, but when kids walk into a building like that, they have so much respect for the building. And so things that we spent a lot of time worrying about, well, we don't want the kids to touch this, or we don't want the kids to do that. They were very, very respectful of the building. They loved it. I think the community loved it. We had an open house also the first week that many of the Lake Bluff citizens who either had gone to that school in the past or their kids had, we opened it up. I always have to talk about it because it was special to my heart. In a lot of communities, not all, but in a lot, there are very much emotional attachments to buildings. And when you demolish a building, there's a lot of feelings about it. Even if the building needed to be demolished, there's many memories in those buildings. And so a board before I got there had enough foresight when they demolished one of our schools to keep the frontispiece of the building. It was an older building. It had been there for a long time. They kept it in pieces. So you can only imagine when I came into the district, they said, oh yeah, and by the way, we're renting storage for all these pieces of the frontispiece. I'm like, okay. And so one of the things I really wanted to do is somehow incorporate that into the design of the building to really bring the community in, because it's their building. And you have to be on a budget, and being on a budget is really hard in a construction project. So I knew that rebuilding the frontispiece in the media center, in the center of the building, was going to cost us $50,000. And I didn't know if I had that money. I really didn't know. So we did not make the final decision that we could construct that until August, before the building opened in September. And if you could have seen some of the people in the community that had lived there their whole lives, and they saw that frontispiece, it was all was well in the community. And that was very important to me, like I said, because schools are really, they're community owned through the taxes. So it was cool. I think if you ask any student, they love being in an invigorated type environment. And I'm getting ready to do that now in the district I'm supporting in North Shore. Our building will be opening the Tuesday after spring break this year. I'm in the process of moving the staff now. And I'm really, my favorite thing, I don't care if I have to be there at 4 a.m. I will be there for a front seat row to see the kids when they walk into the building. It's very cool.
That's awesome. I love that you said too, I think a good point is it's the community's building, right? You put your work into it, you brought the people in. It's the community's building at the end of the day. And that's, I think, important to remember.
And it's exciting for them.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to get a view into the meetings. You have so many different stakeholders, right? And possibly competing priorities. Obviously, the end result addressed everything, and it's a beautiful facility. How do you manage through those potential conflicts, like of priorities, or people being concerned that something that they're looking for might not be addressed?
That's a good question, and I would say not easily. You have to be a very, very good listener. And I think one of the things we did from the very beginning is kind of talk about ground rules. This was a group that was very respectful of each other. If we could honor wishes and it was within our scope, we would do it. Sometimes we would charge people to ask questions. For instance, one of the science teachers, because all of our labs were remodeled, one of our science teachers had questions and she had to go back and talk to her team. The community members, it was very interesting because even though they might know construction, schools are a whole different ballgame. And to have experts at the table they're able to talk about schools and education, they're able to talk about architecture of schools. We were able to address parent concerns because, as Tracy said, our two parents were like, I don't know how I feel about this lunchroom in the basement. And so every week we met for an hour 15, and we would go through these drawings, and there would always be more done. I think another stage of the construction process, because it's not only this group you're worried about, then we would bring the plans to the board, and we had 2 board representatives, and they would have their feedback, and you listen, and we could either say why we weren't doing something, or we would bring that back to the architect and talk through it. But a third realm, there's even another one, is that school districts, now they legally have to do it. My feeling was you should be doing it. Should be working with your village and getting permits and zoning and working through their architectural review board. The law has now changed, so districts have to do that. I just feel like, especially in a small town, you have to do that because, again, it's part of the taxpayer, it's their school. So the architecture review board came up with 2 big things for us. One of them was they did not like the design of the front of the building. I felt like that was really reasonable. I mean, they're in charge of what buildings look like in the town. The architect had to go back. I will share that it was $100,000 more what they wanted us to do. But this is a building that's going to be there for a long time. And so we honored that. But the second thing, which I'm going to share, I learned something from. One of the members told us that in the new wing, one of the new wings, she was very concerned about it being too dark, even though the classrooms all opened up to outside. In the middle of these classrooms, she was concerned it was going to be very dark. And she suggested a skylight. What she didn't know is we had talked about that in our meetings and said, we can't afford a skylight and we're not doing it. So we told her, we're going to bring it back to the team and talk about it. Well, the bottom line is we did it. And even saying we were going to do it, I still had my doubts. And I think as we toured, we invited the people that really helped us and gave feedback. For instance, in our case, the Architectural Review Board, they kind of had a special showing of the building. And it was really important for me to thank her because her feedback created a situation. I think she was right. I mean, I don't know architecture. And so it's really the process of listening, discussing it with the experts, processing, looking at prices. Can we afford it? If we do this, what do we have to give up? And working through it. And you have to do that with every single item. So it's very time consuming. And I will share openly, as the superintendent of a small district, this was all encompassing for me for a couple years.
What other advice can you share with anybody who is looking to move forward with a large capital project? What would be helpful?
Oh, there's all kinds of advice. In fact, I'd like to write a book or an article or something, but I don't have time because I'm too busy working part-time. I would say that when you go into a construction project, what's going to bring you the very best project is many different perspectives. Whereas if you're trying to cut back on time and you really don't want all the perspectives, you could do that, but you're going to pay for it in the long run. If you really want to do a good job and do the right thing for people, you need a committee that is very diverse in their thinking. So, 1 or 2 of our team members, I put on because I knew they'd be calling me every day when they heard about things. Why not have them on in the committee? They provided some of the best feedback we had. I also think something I've learned over the years, which has been very surprising to me, is that furniture plays a big part in this. And people are very attached to what kind of furniture they like in their rooms to teach with. And when you change that, because for us, we had to change it. I mean, we had very traditional furniture. It's a big change, and teachers may or may not be comfortable with that. So you need to tell them throughout the process, this is what's happening. This is what you're going to have. They actually tried furniture, sat on furniture, helped pick furniture up. But that's a whole different ball game than when they walk into their classroom and their furniture isn't there. Teachers can get very upset about the size of their teacher desk, or if they don't have teacher desks. We eliminated teacher desks. That was something that I don't think I ever really thought too much of. I just thought everybody should be really happy we've got all this new furniture. But it forces teachers into reteaching or teaching themselves to teach in new ways. I think the other thing, and I'm going to sneak it in because I think it was really important to me, when you're doing a renovation, there's a lot of technology considerations. And anybody that knows me knows that technology isn't always my friend, and I need people that I can trust to advise me. And so at the time, we're a small district, and we had single path that had helped me literally my entire superintendency in Lake Bluff. I actually had Ken Garcia sit at the table with me at several of these construction meetings, advising me, telling me what we should be doing, what we shouldn't, as far as technology, the outlets and the internet, and going to the cameras. You know, he worked with the people that supplied the cameras. And I never, ever worried about any of that because we didn't have technology staff in the district that could have helped us with that. And they were really our partner and worked well with the architect and the construction manager. And even if you do have that staff, because right now in the district that I'm in, I have staff that specializes in that area. I know at least on one occasion, they've called Ken. I kept saying, if you don't know the answer, I'm going to have you call him, because he knows the answer and he was integral in really helping me figure that out. So.
Well, thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Jean, for taking the time this morning. Really appreciate it. This is very helpful and very insightful. And thank you to our viewers and listeners for joining the DYOPATH Connections. And if you found value, please subscribe and comment. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and of course, DYOPATH.com.